Welcome to the Berggrund Forum, everybody. Thank you for coming. And two announcements. One, next week's Berggrund Forum is a pretty interesting one. We've got Kevin Adams, Sam Danick, John Hosford, and Michelle Romanchuk talking about what is information literacy anyway. So a panel forum from our librarians. And I just want to remind everyone that tomorrow, Friday, is the beginning of the Light Matters Film Festival, created by two of the art professors here at Alfred, James Hansen and who's the other person who's creating that? Can anyone remember? Oh, well, James and his colleague. That's going on from Friday till Sunday, and it should be very exciting. And today we're very happy to have Amanda Lipnicki, Professor of Mathematics, who's going to give us a talk about math, art, and culture in Iceland and Finland. Thank you, Amanda.
All right, so I'm just going to give my consent to be recorded here. Thank you all for being here today. I really appreciate your support. The purpose of this presentation is to disseminate information from the Bridges 2022 conference this summer in Helsinki, Finland. I was funded to go there by the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences here at AU and also by the Bernstein Fund. So thank you very much for that. And I attended and presented some of my artwork that's based on some of my math art research. So I'll discuss a bit about my math arts research, other projects that I found beautiful and interesting at the conference, as well as some of my experiences just while visiting Finland and Iceland. I also want to raise awareness about the Bridges organization and what it does, as well as some of our upcoming math courses that may interest students here. So a little bit about me first. I was raised in Greenville, North Carolina. I was one of 4 children, and my mom was very hardworking and worked her way from secretary up to accountant, although she has no degree. And my father was a cook in various restaurants prior to retiring. So I've taken a bit of each of them in me. I love food. I love learning about different cultures, and I love mathematics and art. I actually started my undergraduate at the University of Maine at Farmington. And so I went pretty far from home, already a little bit of adventure in me there and interest in colder weather and climates. And there I started taking math, art courses for about a year. And I missed math and science, and I had never had an opportunity to take a physics course. So I was inspired by a philosophy class of all things, which covered some of the history of mathematics and science as well, to go back and take some math courses and also some physics courses as well. So I ventured into studying mathematics and declared my major in mathematics instead of art. But I also learned how to knit as an undergraduate in a club, and I still very much love art and fiber arts. I was taught to knit by a librarian with infinite patience. I don't know how she dealt with me, thinking back to how many questions I would ask her as I was struggling to learn how to knit, and relying solely on her. I didn't use a book or videos or anything at the time. She was amazing. Her name's Sarah Otley, and she's still a perpetual student and librarian, probably working on degree 4 or something like that right now at the University of Maine at Farmington. And I was initially inspired to declare a math major because of a course in geometry in undergraduate. So very visually inspired, a lot of writing, a lot of proofs. It was a higher level inquiry-based course where we were asked questions and not given many answers. We had mathematical papers due every week, and I absolutely loved it. The professor of that course, Paul J. Gies, became my mentor and my advisor. He was just such an amazing person in terms of his energy and his interests. He actually is a novelist in addition to a math professor. He studied English as an undergraduate in addition to mathematics. And funnily enough, I now have a student in Calculus 2 who took Calculus 1 with Paul J. Gies online, which I thought was amazing. So a little bit about another point of inspiration here. In that undergraduate course, we used an amazing textbook as well by Dinah Tamina and also her husband, David Henderson, who were both mathematicians at Cornell University. This book is in the inquiry-based style, which means there are a lot of questions, not so many answers, some guidance, and you're expected to build the mathematics in your cohort of your classroom together. It was a wonderful experience, and in that book, Dinah Tamina includes a pattern for a crocheted hyperbolic plane. So for those of you who aren't familiar with knit and crochet, they both use some kind of tools and yarn to loop together fabric, right, to produce fabric. And knitting uses typically 2 needles. It depends on what kind of knitting you're doing. There may be some other needles involved there. And a standard tool for crochet is a hook, just a single hook. So Dinah Tamina's work, she's an Estonian mathematician, by the way. She is known widely for being the first to popularize this idea of a crocheted model of a hyperbolic plane. And prior to that, a lot of these models were just paper and not very pliable. They wouldn't last very long. So what is a hyperbolic plane? The idea of a hyperbolic plane is it's another kind of geometry as opposed to a Euclidean flat plane. And it comes from the idea of a surface, instead of having no curvature, actually has constant negative curvature. And an example of where we encounter these in real life is, for example, curly-leafed kale, the edges of curly-leafed kale, the way it kind of turns back on itself like the images in this picture. That is an example of something that exhibits hyperbolic geometry. So Dinah Tamina did numerous workshops, talks, co-authored this book with David Henderson, and also helped curate many art shows related to hyperbolic geometry. This is one of those shows with some of her giant crocheted hyperbolic planes. And she's pictured here amongst her work. One amazing thing about the Bridges Conference this year is that Dinah Tamina was a keynote speaker at the conference. So I actually was able to meet her. And not only that, but she was very tolerant of my fangirling. And not only kind and humble, but she was really happy to meet people that had been inspired by the textbook that she had co-authored with her late husband. So she was extremely gracious. Her talk it was clear that she was not only committed to mathematics and art, but she also was very much a humanist and had made a lot of efforts to reach out to people that are often left on the margins of society, and had done work with the disabled and people in regions that often aren't reached for some kind of outreach. So not only, the other thing that really fascinated me is, she's kind of known as the mother of modern mathematical crochet. She was even in Science magazine when I was an undergrad for this, and I wrote her an email saying how did you crochet this thing that you described in there? And she actually wrote me back, and I was surprised because it's an easy thing to crochet. Anybody that knows anything about crochet would know how to do it, but I didn't really know about crochet at the time. And her talk at Bridges actually traced as far as she could, not only her work and the history of her work, but the history of hyperbolic modeling as far back as she could take it. And it appears that way back, I mean, it hasn't really been popularized until her, but she probably wasn't the very first person to think of it. Someone isolated had probably thought of it first. Seems that Emmy Noether, who is a famous female mathematician in ring theory, one of her contemporaries, not Emmy Noether herself, but someone lesser known, may have crocheted a hyperbolic model because they have some remnants of this somewhere in some museum, but it took a lot of hunting. So it was a very interesting talk. The work that I presented at the conference is here. This is a fleet of surfaces called quadric surfaces. They're a generalization of conic sections, and they're commonly used in a Calculus 3 course where you're learning how to understand multivariable functions and graph in 3 dimensions and higher. So it's really a big stepping stone for a lot of students because they're opening their minds to higher dimensional thinking not only geometrically, but algebraically, and it's quite difficult at first. So I became curious, is there a way that I can crochet these surfaces? In fact, at first I was thinking knitting because I'm kind of a native knitter because I learned that first. But to knit very small models that would take less time would be harder. And crocheted fabric is also, it tends to be thicker. It uses more yarn. It tends to have more rigid structure. So I chose crochet instead of knitting for those reasons. Because I also thought eventually I want to get more students involved if there's students who want to learn more about fiber arts, and this would make it more approachable for them. So a lot of the mathematics involved actually comes from, well, there's a bunch of different areas and there's details that I won't talk about, but the main ideas come from work that student usually learns in Calculus 2 at university level. So maybe a second semester math course. And those ideas I have pictured here. So I would start by taking an equation that represents a surface in 3 dimensions and discretize it into a series of rows and number of stitches per row. And that process came from, essentially, I would think of if I could, a function that of a single variable, like in the plane, that I could rotate around to produce a bunch of circular cross sections. And then each cross section would tell me about how many stitches per row by taking a circumference of the circle at that point. But then one complication is that the fabric curves, right, as you move along. So if you want to measure how many rows you need, you actually, to get something more accurate, you need arc length. And without taking that into consideration, a shape like this ellipsoid or egg, whatever you'd like to call it, would be a lot more distorted. So this was something that I discovered after inviting in Megan Martinez, who is also a math professor. She works at Ithaca College, and I had met her through a professional development program, and she had invited me to a knitting group thing and a conference that I didn't go to, but I remembered that she had invited me to this thing, and I was like, she seems really cool. And I was honestly getting kind of lonely and bored just doing this by myself. And she's provided amazing ideas, and it's just been such a wonderful collaboration. So I'm extremely grateful for that. Okay. In addition to producing quadric surfaces, we've kind of been able to generalize together pattern making for crochet in terms of surfaces of revolution. We were producing a lot of pieces over and over, modeling these things, trying to get a nice scale, making things look good, playing with the visual aspects, but not so much the mathematics. And I got very irritated, and I said, we're just doing the same algorithm over and over. We should write a program, even though I'm not a programmer. But Megan is a little bit. So she contacted me. She seemed a little hesitant at first, but then she contacted me a month or two later, and she had written a framework for a program that would at least do the initial bits for us, but it still needed more work and testing. So over my sabbatical this spring, we worked closely together to improve the program and to make the approximations in terms of row numbers and in terms of number of stitches per row more accurate. And we actually met some interesting math along the way. But this work is not published yet. So I'm not going to tell you all the details about that, but we expect to publish the work with our program early in 2023. In addition to some patterns specifically for the quadric surfaces, our program does take into account things like gauge, which is how your particular hand knits with that particular material or crochets with that particular material. The program is adaptable to either knit or crochet. And so it makes it a lot easier for a user to output patterns for what they want to produce. Some other pieces of work at the conference, there were many wonderful pieces, so I will only cover a few during this talk. But I was lucky that my colleague, Elizabeth Matson, was able to travel to the conference as well. And she produced a hyperbolic skirt, which is really a monumental task because of how large, I mean, you can see how large this piece is, many, many, many hours of work. And you can kind of see she didn't use a high increase number. So it's just a very subtle curvature that's happening around the edges, like that curly leaf kale idea. She also donated this piece after the conference to a Finnish program that I can't remember the entire name of. It's very long, but it's a STEAM program that travels around Finland, and hundreds of children every year get a chance to view pieces in that STEAM program. So they will get to actually see, touch, feel this hyperbolic skirt and learn about some of the mathematics behind it. Another piece that I really enjoyed was called "'Tis Are Visible in Raymond." "'Tis Are Visible" is actually the bottom piece here, and "Raymond" is the upper piece. These pieces are by Tis, Ernst, and Raymond Putz. They are, so Tis is a Dutch artist who attended the conference. And you can see here that there's some LED lights in the pieces. There were actually 2 spheres that were connected by the lights. And they are, the currents are traveling along the geodesics or great circles in these spheres. So very interesting pieces. Her husband produced this piece in 2009. He passed away in 2012. He was also an artist. And these pieces are widely sold by a company called Molm, M-O-L-M, I believe. And I actually saw some of these lights in a hotel in Helsinki while walking around, like in the lobby after talking with her about this. The bottom piece is her creation. It is from 2021, and it is actually a projection of the vertices of the sphere down. And she was inspired by the relationship with a carbon atom to an icosahedron. And this is actually Tis here in the background with the work. Another piece that I really enjoyed was called Platonic Neurons. These are made out of nylon, 3D printed nylon, and they are hand dyed, hand painted. So they're all based on platonic solids, as you can see, but they've been given this neuronal kind of shape, which is really interesting. Christopher Hanusa, interestingly, was at Binghamton University, which is where I did my PhD. And we overlapped for a time there. He's now a professor at Queens College in New York City. And he also has a thriving art business, as far as I can tell, producing jewelry and other kinds of sculptures that he sells online. One other piece that I loved was called Richard's Closed Surfaces. They were actually envelopes by Richard Hammock, who is also a math professor. And the picture can't really do it justice because it's kind of a subtle thing, but I think a lot of writers and mathematicians, people who like writing letters, will appreciate it. You can see that he's printed on the box Richard's closed surfaces. So he actually got this box produced specially. And what he did was he utilized the address label window and played with it to make the topology resemble that of different closed surfaces, meaning that it can be deformed into different shapes that are the same as these surfaces. One particular example here pictured more closely is, and he also printed what they were on here. This is actually a Klein bottle with a hole in it. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the Klein bottle, it's actually it naturally lives in 4-dimensional space, but it can be embedded in 3-dimensional space with an intersection. And this is a picture of one of those. It has no distinguishable outside and inside. So if you try to trace over this entire glass bottle, you'll see you cover both what looks like the outside as well as the inside, and they're all smoothly connected except for that intersection, of course. And so he was playing with these envelopes so that if you deformed them enough, you would get this kind of surface or some other kind of interesting surface. Another piece that I enjoyed is by a friend who first told me about bridges. Her name is Felicia Lee. She's a lecturer at University of Southern California. It's called natural log of 2. So the natural log actually has an expression as what's called an alternating series. And the beginning of that series is the number 1 and -1/2 plus 1/3 minus 1/4 plus 1/5 and so on. And so in this piece, she's used some perspective drawing, which is why there are these lines from the corner to help her gauge the ratios of the areas that she's drawing. The first rectangle is representing an area of +1. The white rectangle next to it is -1/2. So it's half of the big 1 rectangle. And then the next one is +1/3 and so on. And she painted it in gouache and also used colored pencils for this piece. The colors are interesting as well because she actually has mathematical synesthesia. For those of you that aren't familiar with that, synesthesia is an interesting way of experiencing the world. It can be connected with a lot of different ideas. Her synesthesia is connected with numbers. So to her, numbers are associated with colors. And so all the colors that she used in this painting were specifically related to her synesthesia. So they were chosen with regards to how she experiences numbers. This is another piece I love that was made in resin. It's called Fibonacci Sequence of Double-Sided Truncated Cubes. It's by an architect who is at a university in Taiwan, as well as a bunch of people that teamed with him to design and produce it. And a truncated cube, the cubes are produced by choosing 3 vertices that lie in a plane together and chopping off a part of the cube. So maybe you can see how those pieces would come from cutting off parts of the cube. And they then took multiple cubes, rotated them 60 degrees to make them fit inside of each other. And the scale of the piece, which you can see a little more here, how the scales of the truncated cubes change, is adjusted according to the numbers in the Fibonacci sequence. And you can also see how the artist actually brought some additional pieces to show how the piece was constructed, which was really fun. Bridges not only features a lot of like a curated art show, but it features peer-reviewed papers related to mathematics and art, technology and science, and hands-on workshops. Here's a workshop that Dr. Matson and I attended together about an 8-colored origami torus by Torrance. And Dr. Matz can be seen working on our 8-colored torus. This was an extremely ambitious workshop. It's not actually something you could finish in the timing of the workshop, which was what, 2 hours? So we only finished a portion of it, but here you can see the completed work, which is also exhibited by Torrance in the art show. This was based on a theorem which showed that any mapping of the torus could be colored with no two adjacent regions or regions sharing a boundary having the same color using 8 colors. And this actually is a constructive proof that there exists a mapping that requires 8 colors. So Bridges, again, is an international organization that fosters connections between mathematics, art, music, architecture, culture. I've seen people from the whole gamut of these fields attending Bridges, which is amazing. And just the body of work and how well they archive everything, I think is amazing. So here is their website. You can also just search Bridges Math Art, and it's the first link that comes up. They have an amazing archive, years and years of art and papers about math and art that are really fun to dig into and peruse. So some facts about Finland that I learned. It's very design oriented, which may be a part of the reason it was chosen as a location for Bridges. Extremely technologically savvy. They actually experienced, I think, a big recession, was it in the 90s? And then made a huge comeback, and their economy is just thriving in part due to early adoption of mobile technology. And Nokia is from Finland, if you're familiar with that company. And they're also virtually a cashless society. Like, I didn't need money at all. Even street vendors that were just selling like food or like handmade jewelry accepted credit cards. So they've also done very well on the banking front because of their early adoption of a lot of cashless banking. It was extremely clean. This was something that maybe surprised me because Helsinki is a major metropolitan area. About 75% of Finland is covered in forest. So wood is a major industry, and they produce a lot of their power with wood. They even have a thriving paper industry, which the waste from that can be used, burned for additional fuel. And the air was extremely clean. The streets were extremely clean. Like, everybody just took pride in keeping everything super clean. I've never seen such a clean city. It was very quiet in most places, except where it had to be buzzing because of like a lot of people. But I was staying very close to the center of the city, maybe 10 minutes walk, and it was just incredibly quiet. In fact, I think the Finnish have, at least from what I've read of the few books I've read about Finland, this respect for silence and peace, and respecting the sphere of silence that a person sort of, I don't know, maybe deserves or has a right to, which I thought was very, very interesting. I felt like the culture was extremely holistic. Saunas are a very big part of Finnish culture. A lot of people go to saunas at least a few times a week. And my husband recently told me that that's been shown to extend lifespan and help with health conditions, but don't quote me on that. So very highly forested country, but even in the city, the air felt extremely clean. And it was very beautiful. There were a lot of parks. People were outside walking, biking, all the time. So even in the center of Helsinki, I noticed a lot of interesting artwork, such as these tessellated pieces that provided almost like an urban mathematical landscape. And a lot of people were just hanging out, like enjoying it, sitting down, talking to friends. Kids were climbing it, of course. So that was one feature that I enjoyed seeing. Also, this three-dimensional tessellated piece in the middle of the city. And finally, just walking down the subway tunnel, they had projections of the same kind of tessellation on the wall, which was really cool. And that's my friend Felicia walking in front of me there, the one who did the natural log of 2 piece. Another place that I visited actually with the Matsons was Suomen Lena. It is a major stopping point if you ever visit Finland. It is pretty close to Helsinki. You can just take a ferry. It's an interconnected 6 islands that feature a fortress that was started in the 1700s and completed in the 1800s. It is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, which means it is extremely well preserved and protected. And it's one of the best examples, probably the best example of like 17 to 1800s fortress building and reinforcing. This is from inside one of the tunnels. And this is a view from over the ramparts, which were absolutely beautiful to walk around and see. Finnish food. I won't say too much because I don't have a lot of time, but one dish that I absolutely loved was called lahiketo, which I'm probably pronouncing completely wrong, but it is salmon with potatoes, fresh dill, and cream-based soup. It was absolutely delicious. I saw this on almost every restaurant and cafeteria menu. So very common dish to eat there. I learned how to make it. It's a 30-minute weeknight meal. It's delicious, it's easy, and I've made it a couple times since I've come back. I don't think you can talk about Finland properly without talking about a notion called Sisu. This is something that is kind of talked about culturally and even amongst people that are second generation immigrants whose parents are from Finland or later back usually have some idea of what Sisu means. There's no real direct translated word that encapsulates all of it in English, but some of the things that describe Sisu are tenacity, grit, being purposeful, and having almost this like inner wellspring of strength. So there's a spirituality component to it that that really helps you keep going during difficult times. Another book that I read that I found, or I'm still reading, that I found very interesting is Teach Like Finland by Timothy D. Walker. He was a elementary school teacher here who went and taught 5th grade in Finland after burning out and having to take personal leave as a teacher here in the United States. Some things that he noticed, his wife was Finnish, which was part of the impetus behind moving there. And she was like, you're doing this all wrong. You shouldn't be burning out. Like there's a better way to teach. Is a lot of emphasis on a joyful classroom, 15-minute hourly breaks, like every hour, 15 minutes for students just to relax and recharge their brains so they're better able to learn. Holistic teaching and learning culture overall. So considering the entire student, sometimes teachers would even just take days to take their students outside and enjoy instead of staying in the classroom all the time doing work. But when they were in the classroom, often students would have a significant amount of time doing some quiet, independent work instead of just listening to their teacher, the expert, do the expert things in front of them. They actually had to do active work in class to learn. And time outside, whether rain or shine or snow, was expected every day. And he absolutely loved teaching there and wrote this book to help explain some of the differences. And Finland is very well known for their high skill level, their good scores in terms of how their students perform in the world compared to other countries. A little bit about Finnish knitting culture. This is a picture from the Finnish National Gallery. They actually had 6 cases full of mittens, all with different patterns ranging from the 1800s through the 1900s. So very big culture there. All of the department stores I visited had like aisles devoted to just like yarn, magazines with patterns, and books as well. And the museum, the Finnish National Gallery, actually had a lot of books with patterns. They sold yarn too, which I've never seen in a museum gift shop. And they also had some samples of actual made work so you could see what it would work up and look like. On the way back from Finland, I made a brief stopover in Iceland because Iceland Air offers this as an option, and my husband and I said, why not? So we stopped over in Iceland. Some fun facts about Iceland: it's located on 2 continents, North America and Europe. They had the first parliament in the world. They're very sparsely populated compared to Finland, which has 5.5 million. 75% of their space is all forested. So imagine much more populated, whereas Iceland's like 370,000 people in total, maybe. There's about 8 people per square mile. It's extremely geologically active. It's breathtaking, even though it's not forested. It's extremely green, partly because there's a lot of moss covering the volcanic rock, and also grasses in certain places. They are a hotbed for geothermal activity. Here you can actually see from one of my hikes with my husband, a huge pipe that carries hot water miles and miles to the city of Reykjavik. And this pipe, the diameter, I don't know exactly the diameter, but I would say, like, if you had a car next to it, the car would just go slightly above. It's a huge pipe. And it carries hundreds of gallons of water per second to the city of Reykjavik for heating and hot water. And in the 70s, already about 40% of their energy was from geothermal activity. I have no idea what it is now, but I suspect it's a higher percentage. There were waterfalls everywhere. It got to a point where when we were driving around, hey, there's this other waterfall we can visit. You want to go? I'm good. This is actually a waterfall that is at the Continental Divide near Pingvellir. So you can see clearly where the tectonic plates are just pushing against each other and pushing rock up. And in one of those places, there's this huge waterfall, which is amazing. Pingvellir is located near where the first parliament in the world happened, as well as some of the first torture and terrible things. Well, that we know of, right? That historically, not first, but. So we also visited a glacier while we were there. This is Selheimajökull Glacier. If you look closely, these are people. Just to give you a sense of the scale, these are actually people up on the glacier. So when I saw that, I was like, snap, let me get a picture, because you really, without being there or even seeing other things against the glacier, it's hard to get a sense of the scale. Below the glacier is a body of water called a glacial lagoon. This didn't even exist until 2009. So the glacier has been receding since the 90s overall, even considering the freeze-thaw cycles. They have elementary school children come every year and measure how deep the lagoon is, as well as make measurements around the nose of the glacier to help track the data and what's happening with its melt. We also happened to see an active volcano. It was 30 minutes from the airport and happened to erupt shortly before we traveled to Iceland, and nothing closed because, it's Iceland and it wasn't that bad an eruption. So there was a fissure that had opened up and magma was shooting out. So on the way back home, before we flew out, we took a couple hours hike in order to view the active eruption. This is my husband, Alex, pictured, and in the background, you can see some lava shooting out, and this is all old lava from an old eruption that has cooled, although there are still some hot spots. You can still see some steam coming out at times. Icelandic sheep, I became obsessed with them. There are so many of them. I said there are about 370,000 people. There are about 800,000 or more Icelandic sheep. Their wool is very special because it includes 2 different kinds of hair. And that distinction helps with protection from the elements. They're also extraordinarily soft. This sheep came up to my husband, Alex, asking for pets. We were on the cliff looking for puffins on Hammock Island. which is biggest, they have the biggest puffin population in the world. And when I came over, she wanted pets too. And when I stopped, she started pulling on my shoelaces. I was amazed at how soft she was. I didn't know sheep could be that soft. There were wool markets everywhere. So Alex was constantly having to say, no, we're not going to pull over this time. And we had to make a very conscious decision. Okay, we're going to go to this wool market, and full of all kinds of yarn, Icelandic yarn, a lot of roving because people there also spin their own yarn a lot. You know, with so many sheep, probably going to learn to knit or crochet. If you have a chance to visit Iceland, I recommend visiting the southern coast. Here we actually saw some puffins up close and personal as they were coming in to roost near the top of the cliffs where we were hiking. It was incredible. And the views were amazing. Even though it rained almost every day we were there, we did not care. It was just incredible. This is another part of the southern coast. You can see a black sand beach here, which was really cool to experience. And this formation is a basalt rock formation where things had formed into hexagonal shapes, hexagonal columns. And finally, Hammock Island is a really amazing place, not only for the puffins, but they have an incredible volcano museum where in 1975, there was a catastrophic eruption that destroyed 400 homes. But they, many years later, unearthed some of those homes, and they built a museum around one of them with the permission of the former owner. In this house that has been sort of entombed in ashes and such, they've preserved as much as possible without touching it. And they actually have technology where you can look around the house without going in it and even find items that were in the house, like wedding gifts, platters, guest book, everything. And they memorialize the stories of people who lived on the island. They were really afraid that the port, which a fifth of Iceland's fish comes from, might end up closed because of all the lava flows. So there was this massive effort to actually cool all the lava, and they have pictures of people with like huge fire hoses and things trying to cool off the lava so that it wouldn't reshape the port and cause problems. In the end, it turned out okay. The port wasn't closed, so maybe their efforts worked. It's unclear. But a really incredible sight to see and experience, and it was very sudden. So pretty remarkable stories included in this event. It's like a North American Pompeii kind of story. So just about the courses that are going to be offered soon in the spring, I will be offering a geometry course, and I will use the modern version of Dinah Tamina's book in that course. And in the fall, I'm hoping to offer, in conjunction with Elizabeth Matson, a math arts course where students will learn about math, arts, and culture in various countries, and also do their own explorations in math and art in paper form, maybe in art form, with an eye for submitting to a Bridges conference where the papers are peer-reviewed as well as the artwork, and maybe even they'll travel there. We're currently looking for funding to help support this work. So if you know of any funding anywhere, we'd appreciate the tips. And of course, if you're interested in either of these courses, I encourage you to sign up. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amanda. We have a few minutes for questions. Beth Ann. Can you repeat the question?
So the question was my early work, what was the scale like? Each piece fit within a 4 by 4 by 4 inch cubic inches. So they're not that large. And I actually made a special display box so that they could be viewed in more of a dark setting, because the display space was very well lit. So it didn't really do justice to the lights that I had put inside the pieces. But the box worked out well. Yeah. So maybe I had to gesture, I don't know, this big. I think it was like 32 by 60 by 32 centimeters or something like that.
Sorry, this is just kind of a goofy observation, but that your friend at the very beginning, that you had her picture in the gallery with her blue knitted piece hanging behind her. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yes. Here?
No, earlier, like practically the first slide. There, that piece makes me think of like the Microsoft Bloom that we all see on our computer screens now with the new operating system. It looks like
Yeah.
it inspired that piece.
Yeah, I wondered. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised.
Amanda, I have a question. Could you go to the what do you call it? Keep going.
This one?
No, keep going. That, stop. When you mentioned, you said that that is a visual demonstration of a theorem.
Mhm.
And I just, could you say something more about that? I mean, like if I'm looking at that, how can I be sure that it is a demonstration, that it's not just a kind of illustration?
So the idea is that we have what's called a torus here, which is like two donuts stuck together on the side, but two torus. So two holes. And there are 8 distinct regions defined by the 8 colors that are used. But yeah, you ask a good question, like how do you know there's not less colors that could be used? I don't know the answer exactly.
Okay. Okay.
But I could think about it and get back to you.
Can I ask another question?
Yes.
One of the things that fascinates me when you're talking about the creative process, these are these are mathematicians producing marvelous artwork. And is it that they work from a mathematical formula, let's say, or theorem or whatever, and they are surprised by what emerges? Or is it that they have some idea of what is going to emerge from the beginning?
It actually varies a lot. So there are people from many fields involved in the conference. One of my friends who does 2-dimensional math art just loves thinking about various geometrical divisions of 2-dimensional space. And she's actually a intercultural relations counselor in the UK at a university, at Arts University. There's some artists, there's some mathematicians, there's some architects. So it's really a cross field, but the way each person approaches their art may vary as well. Some people start with a mathematical idea and just experiment, like with the tessellation of the truncated cubes. Some people have a particular mathematical idea that they're trying to illustrate, such as Eve Torrance's 8-colored torus here. And I would say those are 2 of the main ways that it starts, but there tends to be a lot of experimentation in addition to maybe some guided math. Some people write programming as well and just play with algorithms to see what they can produce and see if they can produce something they consider beautiful. And maybe they discard a lot of pieces in the meantime that they don't consider beautiful. So it varies a lot.
Any other questions?
This isn't so much a question, but I have cried through every math class I've ever taken in my life, and I'm fascinated by what you've done. So thank you. So hurry up and write your book.
Any other questions? If not, then I'd like to thank Amanda again for a wonderful presentation. And by all means, come to the front and ask further questions, or just make a contribution to that wonderful proposal you've got going for next fall and that you're looking for funds for. Thank you.